Well, equity. Representative Ann New talked about it. I think when we try to understand concepts, it's best to look at the ideal, look at where that ideal has been achieved. There is a place we can look to where all outcomes are equal, where final and eternal equity has finally been achieved. It's any given graveyard. That's where we're all the same. That's where we all have the same outcomes and the same value. In life, it's different. In life, we make choices, we have preferences, we have values, traditions, we make decisions, we go left or right, we choose this career or that. We have different focuses, and our conduct and our choices and our values and a lot of luck sometimes translates to the outcomes that we experience in our lives. And because of that, there will always be differences, there will always be disparities. And as long as we fail to recognize that, we're going to fail to solve the real problems that are actually facing the next generation and facing our children. And it's with that in mind that I want to talk about the ethnic studies provision once again in this bill. I've noticed that the language has changed a little bit. Last time we talked about how anti-racism, as defined in a previous engrossment of this bill, meant actively working to identify and eliminate racism in all its forms so that power and resources are redistributed and shared equitably among racial groups. Boy, oh boy. That was an example of what we call the Bailey. There's this rhetorical fallacy called Mott and Bailey. And it's a reference to a medieval type of castle arrangement where the motte is this tower and the bailey is this walled off surrounding area around the tower. And the imagery there is that when you put out what you actually want, what your actual goal is, your actual position, the bailey, and it draws attack and people react to it, like, for instance, saying that your goal is to transform the curriculum of the state of Minnesota in order to affect the redistribution of power and resources. When you do that, and then that gets attacked, as it did in the previous engrossment, well, you retreat to your motte, you retreat to your fortress, you water it down. You say, no, 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 no. And this was actually done when we talked about this provision originally. It was presented as, well, you know, ethnic studies is just, we'll bring ethnic cuisine for everybody to share, or maybe we'll have a day where people come to school wearing their ethnic apparel, and we'll teach kids about the complicated history of World War II and Japanese internment camps and such. And of course, if that's what ethnic studies was, I don't think you would find much opposition to it. But of course, that's not what ethnic studies is. It's not what it was in the previous engrossment. And even though the language has changed somewhat, it still retains its what I regard to be insidious objective, which is to advance a particular ideology, a particular worldview, a worldview that divides us, a worldview that trains our children to judge each other according to the color of their skin rather than the content of their character. And the change in language has not alleviated that. So now the new language, the new definition of anti-racist, is actively working to identify and eliminate racism in all forms in order to change policies, behaviors, and beliefs that perpetuate racist ideas and actions. There's your motte, there's your fortress. It's much harder to attack that one, but I'll give it a try. All right, so we're going to change policies. Well, which policies? Policies in the school, policies in government, behaviors. Okay, well, that's often something that we have to contend with in school. In fact, disciplinary action in this bill is something that's been spoken of more than once today. But beliefs, that's an interesting word. We're going to change beliefs. Well, who's defining what those beliefs are? I'll tell you who isn't. You know, it was spoken earlier, I believe it was Representative Edelson stated something interesting. She made the point that in this bill, you have made it a point to listen to teachers rather than legislators. That's a nice little slogan. But what is a legislator? How did we get here? What are we doing here? We're representatives. That's what we're called. Who do we represent? 43,000 Minnesotans. Amongst those, who are the most proximate, directly served stakeholders in the education system? Students, the custodians of whom are parents. And so really what you're doing here is you're taking the decision-making power over what the policies, behaviors, and beliefs of students ought to be away from parents and delegating them to these district advisory boards that have survived this process, that are going to be determining curriculum with this mandate to make sure that it's anti-racist, and also, by the way, to make sure it's culturally sustaining. This is one that I missed last time around. This is an interesting definition. Culturally sustaining means integrating content and practices that infuse the culture and language of Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities who have been and continue to be harmed and erased through the education system. Really? Well, that's news to me. Harmed and erased. Erased. That's a heck of a word. I'm looking here at the State Demographer website. Recent data on age, race, and ethnicity. A couple of key findings. In Minnesota, people of color, which is to say those who identify as a race other than white alone, and or those who are Hispanic or Latinx, which is a word we're using in government documents apparently. Caustic objects. Make up 20% of the total population. Non-Hispanic white Minnesotans represent the remaining 80. All race groups have grown recently in Minnesota, but between 2010 and 2018, the state has added 5 times as many people of color as non-Hispanic white residents. Is this what erasure looks like? Between 2010 and 2018, the fastest growing racial group in Minnesota was the Black or African American population, which grew by 36%, adding more than 96,500 people. Second fastest was the Asian population, which grew by 32%, adding 69,800 people, followed by the Hispanic population, which grew by 24%, adding 59,000 people. I'm not sure the erasure agenda is particularly successful. There is harm being done, though, through our education system. And that harm we talked about last time, when you take children like my own and the friends that they have that they get to know in the neighborhood, all of whom are on, we live on the same block, right? So we're in the same socioeconomic stratus. We're all meeting life at the same moment and pretty well equitable. That's usually what living on the same block indicates. And so I've got my son who's mixed race. He's got a friend across the street who's an East African girl. He's got another friend a couple houses down who's a blonde-haired, blue-eyed white boy. And the three of them play and run up and down the street and go to the park and have a good time. And you know what they're not thinking about? Equity. You know what they're not thinking about? Skin color and how it determines outcomes. But we're going to teach them that. We're going to interject into their already formulated relationship on purpose through curriculum the idea that somehow, some way, amongst them, there's this hidden dynamic that they're only becoming aware of as a result of the curriculum, whereby one of them is being oppressed by the other two, but not to the same degree. And it's all based upon who's paler than who. Pretty reprehensible. And I got to tell you, it sets us up for a breakdown of social cohesion. It propagates grievance and discontent and disunity. And it also, even more insidious than that, it distracts us from our real salvation, in material terms. Because as it turns out, and this is something that we used to teach our kids, as it turns out, if you need something, you should go get it. If you have a need or a want, you should take the action required to produce it. You should be productive. You should demonstrate virtue. That's what we used to teach our kids. Now, and in that context, if your kid didn't have something, you teach them, all right, let that motivate you. Let that light a fire under you to take the action that you need to take rationally in the context of reality to achieve that which you desire, to achieve that which you need. What ethnic studies does is it completely diverts from that worldview. It actually replaces it. That's probably one of the policies, behaviors, and beliefs that need to be changed under this definition of anti-racism. Instead of facilitating productivity and virtue, we're going to replace that with grievance and redistribution. We're going to say, well, the reason why you want, the reason why you have less, the reason why you haven't gotten where you want to be is because somebody else who looks different than you has oppressed you. And we can prove it with statistics, not with your actual experience, not with the actual qualitative evaluation of what you've done with your life, but based upon aggregate statistics. All of that is baked into this cake of ethnic studies, and as has been noted by several folks who have risen to speak today, this is one of the many mandates that rides inside the Trojan horse of historic funding that we're giving to our school districts. And they know it, because I, like many others, have talked to my superintendents, and they're very aware of the fact that there's nothing to celebrate here. We, of course, had that Stillwater superintendent who was quoted in the Pioneer Press saying that this is, in his estimation, the most damaging session for education in his memory, which is something to say under a Democrat trifecta when you regard yourselves as the party of public education. You found a way to give people more money and somehow have them operate as though they had less. That's what's going to happen. And it takes power away from elected officials, from school boards. It takes power away from parents, certainly parents. And it also, under this same worldview, this ethnic studies worldview, another provision that I just learned about, apparently, if you're a member of a protected class as a teacher, you just get like carte blanche to teach whatever you want. That's in this bill. So you could be a math teacher and you're in a protected class and you decide that you're gonna make that day's math curriculum a story of your lived experience of oppression, not teach a single bit of arithmetic, and there's nothing that can be done to discipline you because that would be considered discrimination against your protected class as a result of this bill. So that certainly disempowers parents, I would think. I, as a parent, if I learned that my seventh grader came home from middle school and his math teacher spent the hour talking about how he's been oppressed in this way or that rather than teaching algebra, that would upset me, and I would call the principal, and the principal would tell me, under this bill, oh, sorry, there's nothing we can do about it. He's protected. I call well, that's terrible. I'm gonna go to my elected official, my local elected official, call up my school board member. Sorry, there's nothing we can do. We don't have any actual power. We're just here to rubber stamp and decide what to cut so that the folks down in St. Paul don't have to take responsibility for it. That's our job. We need to restore the independence of our independent school districts. This bill doesn't do it, and that's why I'll be voting red. Thank you.